A rifle shot cracked the morning air as Rebecca Anderson bolted from the church, her white wedding gown billowing behind her like a sail caught in a storm. The fog that had settled over the small town of Silver Creek, Colorado, in the spring of 1876 now became her ally, swallowing her whole as she fled from the life she'd nearly been forced to accept. "Rebecca!" Her father's voice boomed through the mist. "You get back here this instant." Rebecca ran faster, her satin slippers already soaked through from the damp ground. The town had awakened to an unusually thick fog that morning, the kind old-timers said appeared only once every few years, rolling down from the mountains and filling every crevice of the valley. Now it concealed her escape from the church where Wallace Thornton, a man 30 years her senior with cold eyes and hands that wandered too freely, had been waiting to make her his bride. Her lungs burned as she pushed deeper into the fog, away from the church, away from her father's gambling debts that had led him to sell her off like cattle at auction. The white dress caught on branches and undergrowth, threads snapping as fabric tore. Rebecca didn't care. Every rip represented another tie severed to the life she was leaving behind. Soon the voices faded, but so did any recognition of her surroundings. The fog had grown so thick she couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The dirt road beneath her feet had given way to wild grass and uneven terrain. The mountains loomed somewhere ahead, but in which direction, she couldn't tell. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes' time seemed as muddled as the landscape. Her wedding dress, once pristine and flowing, now hung heavy and mud-stained around her ankles. The cold began to seep into her bones as afternoon shadows lengthened behind the veil of fog. "Hello," Rebecca called, her voice small against the vast emptiness. "Is anyone there?" Only silence answered, broken occasionally by distant animal sounds that made her heart race. She had escaped one fate only to find herself facing another, lost in the wilderness with night approaching and no provisions. The spring air would turn bitter cold after sunset in the mountains. Rebecca stumbled over a hidden rock, falling hard onto the damp earth. Tears welled in her eyes as she tried to stand, a sharp pain shooting through her ankle. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood and salt. "Fool girl," she muttered to herself, running with no plan, no direction. But even as she admonished herself, she knew she would make the same choice again. Wallace's yellowed teeth and liquor breath flashed in her memory, his fingers gripping her wrist too tight as he told her father, "She'll do just fine." The mist seemed to thicken around her as daylight began to fade, transforming from white to gray to an ominous blue. Rebecca limped forward, directionless, the pain in her ankle intensifying with each step. The distant howl of a wolf sent shivers down her spine. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, 2 short whistles followed by one long one pierced the fog. Rebecca froze, listening intently. Again the pattern repeated, 2 short, 1 long. "Hello?" she called, louder this time. "Please, I'm lost." A moment of silence. Then, "Keep talking, miss," a deep voice answered. "And listen for my whistle. 2 short, 1 long. Follow the sound." The whistle came again, closer this time. Rebecca turned toward it, limping as fast as her injured ankle would allow. "I'm coming," she shouted. "Please don't leave. I ain't going nowhere," the voice assured her. The whistle repeated, guiding her forward. She followed the sound for what seemed like an eternity, her dress catching and tearing on unseen obstacles, her ankle throbbing with each step. Finally, a shadow materialized in the fog, tall and broad-shouldered, the silhouette of a man astride a horse. "There you are," the voice said, gentler now. "You're a fair distance from anywhere, miss." As Rebecca drew closer, the man came into focus. He sat tall in his saddle, a brown leather duster draped over his shoulders, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. When he tilted his head up, she saw he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 25, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. Xavier Foster. He introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. His gaze traveled over her torn and muddied wedding dress, but his expression revealed nothing. "Seems like you've had yourself quite a day." Rebecca swayed, suddenly light-headed from exhaustion and relief. "Rebecca Anderson," she managed before her good leg buckled beneath her. Xavier dismounted in one fluid motion, catching her before she hit the ground. "Whoa there, Miss Anderson." His hands were strong but gentle as he steadied her. "You're hurt." "It's just my ankle," Rebecca said, trying to stand straight despite the pain. "I'll be fine." Xavier looked skeptical. "Night's coming fast, and this fog ain't lifting anytime soon. My cabin's not far. I can take you there, get that ankle looked at, and tomorrow when there's light we can figure out where you need to be." He paused, studying her face. "Unless you're eager to get back to whatever you're running from." Rebecca's chin lifted defiantly. "I'm not going back." A hint of a smile touched Xavier's lips. "Didn't figure you were." He guided her to his horse, a magnificent dapple gray stallion that stood patiently in the mist. "This here's Smoke. He's sturdy enough to carry us both." With surprising gentleness for a man of his size, Xavier helped Rebecca onto the saddle before mounting behind her. One strong arm wrapped around her waist to keep her secure as he took the reins with his free hand. "Hold tight," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. The horse moved forward confidently despite the limited visibility. Rebecca found herself leaning back against Xavier's chest, drawing from his warmth and steadiness. After the terror of her near wedding and hours lost in the fog, the rhythmic motion of the horse and the solid presence behind her brought an unexpected sense of calm. "How did you find me?" she asked after they had ridden in silence for several minutes. "Wasn't looking for you specifically," Xavier replied. "Was tracking a mountain lion that's been taking calves from the herd. The fog slowed me down. When I heard you calling, I figured I'd better investigate." "You used that whistle often?" "Since I was a boy. My pa taught me said if we ever got separated in bad weather, that whistle would carry farther than a voice. Two short, one long. That's always been our signal." There was a pause before he added, "It's just me now, but old habits stick." Rebecca nodded, sensing there was more to that story but not wanting to pry. "Well, I'm grateful for that habit. And for you finding me." They emerged into a small clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A corral beside it housed several horses who nickered at their approach. Beyond the cabin, Rebecca could make out the shadowy outlines of a barn and other outbuildings. "Welcome to Foster Ranch," Xavier said as he helped her dismount, supporting her weight as her feet touched the ground. "It ain't much, but it's home." The cabin was warm and surprisingly tidy inside. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across plank floors and rough-hewn walls adorned with a few simple decorations, a painted landscape, a mounted set of antlers, a shelf of books that surprised Rebecca with its variety of titles. Xavier guided her to a chair by the fire. "Let me take a look at that ankle." Rebecca hesitated, suddenly aware of her situation alone in a cabin with a stranger, miles from town. Xavier seemed to read her thoughts. "You have my word as a gentleman, Miss Anderson. I mean you no harm." He pointed to a closed door across the room. "That's my sister's room. She's away visiting our aunt in Denver, but she'll be back in a few days. You can have her bed tonight." Something in his steady gaze convinced Rebecca to trust him. She nodded and extended her leg, wincing as Xavier carefully removed her ruined slipper. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he examined her swollen ankle. "Don't think it's broken, just a bad sprain. I've got some liniment that'll help with the swelling." He stood and moved to a cabinet, returning with a small jar and clean bandages. "So," he said as he knelt before her again, "mind telling me what has a bride running through the wilderness on her wedding day? Or is that a story you'd rather keep to yourself?" Rebecca watched him work, his strong hands moving with unexpected tenderness. "I was being forced to marry a man I despise," she said finally. "Wallace Thornton." Xavier's hands paused momentarily. "The cattle baron from over Silverdale Way? The very same. My father owes him money from gambling debts. I was to be the payment." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Wallace is cruel. I've seen how he treats his ranch hands, his horses." I couldn't. Her voice broke. "You don't have to explain," Xavier said quietly, resuming his work on her ankle. "Some debts aren't worth paying." When he finished wrapping her ankle, Xavier brought her a plate of stew he'd had simmering on the stove and a cup of strong coffee. Rebecca realized suddenly how ravenous she was, having eaten nothing since the previous evening, too nervous about her impending wedding to stomach breakfast. As they ate, Xavier told her about his ranch, the cattle operation he'd built from almost nothing after his parents died 5 years earlier, leaving him and his younger sister, Clara, to fend for themselves. He spoke with pride of his small but growing herd, of the horses he bred and trained that were developing a reputation throughout the territory. "Tomorrow, when the fog lifts, I can take you wherever you need to go," Xavier offered as he cleared their plates. Rebecca stared into the fire, reality settling heavily on her shoulders. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "My father will be looking for me. Wallace too." Xavier leaned against the mantel, regarding her thoughtfully. "What if you stayed here for a spell? I could use help around the place with Clara gone. My sister's clothes would fit you well enough. Nobody would think to look for a runaway bride working as a ranch hand." Rebecca looked up at him, searching for any sign of deception, but found only sincerity in his storm-gray eyes. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Xavier was quiet for a moment, absently running his thumb over a scar on his palm. "Let's just say I know something about being trapped, and about choosing your own path, even when others try to choose it for you." He straightened, suddenly looking slightly embarrassed. "Besides, Clara would have my hide if I turned away someone in need." For the first time that day, Rebecca smiled a genuine smile that lightened something inside her. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Foster. At least until I figure out my next move." "Xavier," he corrected. "If you're staying, might as well use my given name." "Xavier," she repeated, testing the name. "And you must call me Rebecca." As she settled into Clara's room that night, the soft quilt pulled up to her chin, Rebecca listened to the occasional creaks of the cabin and Xavier's quiet movements in the main room. She had run from one future directly into uncertainty, yet somehow, in this stranger's home, she felt safer than she had in years. Morning brought clarity as the fog dissipated under the climbing sun, revealing the true beauty of Foster Ranch. From the cabin's porch, Rebecca could see rolling pastures dotted with cattle, a clear creek winding through the property, and mountains rising majestically in the distance. The air smelled of pine and sage, fresh and clean after the previous day's heavy mist. Xavier appeared from the barn, leading a chestnut mare. "How's the ankle?" he called. Rebecca tested her weight on it. The swelling had gone down considerably overnight. "Much better. Your liniment worked wonders." "Good." He nodded toward the house. "I laid out some of Clara's things for you on the table. Figured you might want something besides that dress." Rebecca glanced down at her ruined wedding gown, now a tattered shadow of its former glory. "Yes, thank you. The clothes, a simple blouse, sturdy riding skirt, and boots fit well enough." When Rebecca emerged from the cabin, her wedding dress left in a heap on the floor, she felt as though she'd shed more than just fabric. She'd left behind Rebecca Anderson, the dutiful daughter, and stepped into a new skin. Who this new Rebecca would be remained to be seen. Xavier was saddling another horse when she approached the barn. He looked up, his expression flickering with something she couldn't quite name before he nodded approvingly. "Those suit you better than that fancy dress." "They feel better," Rebecca admitted, running her hands down the practical fabric. "Thank you." "This here's Penny," Xavier said, patting the chestnut mare's neck. "She's got a sweet disposition. Thought you might like to ride with me while I check the herd. Best way to get the lay of the land." Despite her still tender ankle, Rebecca found herself eager to explore. "I'd like that very much." The day passed in a blur of new experiences. Xavier showed her the boundaries of his property, explained his breeding program for both cattle and horses, and introduced her to the two ranch hands who helped him, brothers named Miguel and Tomas Rodriguez, who lived in a small house near the barn. The brothers' eyebrows had risen at the sight of Rebecca, but Xavier had simply introduced her as Miss Rebecca, who'll be staying with us a while, and they'd asked no questions. The knowing look they exchanged, however, told Rebecca that speculation would follow. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Rebecca rose early, helping with breakfast before joining Xavier for morning chores. Her city-bred hands blistered and then toughened as she learned to muck stalls, feed chickens, and tend the small kitchen garden behind the cabin. In the afternoons, Xavier taught her to ride properly, not side saddle as she'd been instructed as a young lady, but astride like a true horsewoman. "You're a natural," he told her on the 5th day as they galloped across an open meadow, Rebecca laughing with the sheer joy of the freedom she felt. When they stopped to rest the horses by the creek, Rebecca watched Xavier as he knelt to drink from the clear water. Sunlight glinted off his dark hair, and when he straightened, water droplets clung to his beard like tiny diamonds. Something warm unfurled in her chest, something she dared not examine too closely. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and pink, Xavier broke their comfortable silence. "Clara's due back in 2 days," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I sent word to her about you staying here." Rebecca's stomach tightened. "Does she mind, Clara?" Xavier smiled. "No. She's curious, of course, but she's got a good heart. She'll welcome you." "And after she returns?" Rebecca asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken between them finally given voice. "What then?" Xavier turned to look at her directly, his expression serious. "That depends on you, Rebecca. What do you want?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before. What did she want? Not Wallace Thornton or any of the suitors her father had paraded before her. Not the stifling life of a proper lady, bound by society's rigid expectations. "I want," she began, then faltered, gathering her courage. "I want to be free to choose my own path. To work with my hands and see the results of my labor. To wake up each morning looking forward to the day ahead instead of dreading it." She paused, then added softly, "I want to stay here, if that's possible." Xavier's eyes never left hers. "It's more than possible. The ranch could use another pair of hands, especially ones as willing to learn as yours. And I—" He hesitated, a rare uncertainty crossing his features. "I've grown accustomed to your company." The admission, simple as it was, made Rebecca's heart flutter. "Is that all you've grown accustomed to?" she asked, bolder than she'd ever been. Xavier's smile was slow and warm. "No, that's not all." He reached out, hesitating just before his fingers would have touched her cheek. "May I?" Rebecca nodded, unable to find her voice. His touch was gentle as his calloused fingertips traced the line of her jaw. "I never expected to find someone like you, Rebecca. When I saw you in that torn wedding dress, lost in the fog, I thought you were some kind of vision. Rebecca leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. I was lost in more ways than one that day. I think perhaps I was meant to get lost so you could find me. The first touch of his lips against hers was gentle, questioning. Rebecca answered by winding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, and she felt as though she were both falling and flying at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I should warn you, he murmured, that once Wallace Thornton discovers where you are, he'll come. Men like him don't take kindly to losing what they believe is theirs. I was never his, Rebecca said fiercely. And I'm not afraid. Not anymore. The next morning, as they finished breakfast, the sound of approaching horses broke the peaceful quiet. Xavier moved to the window, his body tensing as he looked out. Wallace, he said grimly, and your father, along with 4 of Wallace's men. Fear gripped Rebecca momentarily before hardening into resolve. I won't go with them. Xavier checked his revolver before tucking it into his holster. No, you won't. He gave her a steady look. Stay inside. Let me handle this. Rebecca shook her head. No, this is my fight. We face them together. After a moment, Xavier nodded. They stepped out onto the porch side by side as the riders approached the cabin. Wallace Thornton sat atop a massive black horse, his corpulent frame draped in expensive clothes that did nothing to disguise the cruelty in his small eyes. Beside him, Rebecca's father looked diminished somehow, his shoulders hunched with either shame or fear. There's the little runaway, Wallace called, his voice oily with false joviality. Come to take you home, girl. Your poor father's been worried sick. Rebecca's father couldn't meet her eyes. Miss Anderson isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go, Xavier said calmly, though Rebecca could sense the tension coiled within him. This is my property, Mr. Thornton. You weren't invited. Wallace's face darkened. This girl belongs to me. Her father promised her hand, and I mean to collect. He jerked his chin toward his men. Get her. 2 riders started forward, but froze when Xavier's revolver appeared in his hand. I wouldn't, he warned. The lady has made her choice. She stays. Wallace's laugh was ugly. 1 man against 5? Those aren't odds I'd bet on, boy. 7 against 5. Came a new voice as Miguel and Tomas stepped out from the barn, rifles raised. Those odds seem better, no? For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Rebecca's father spoke, his voice thin with age and regret. Wallace, perhaps we should— Shut up, Anderson. Wallace snapped. I paid good money for your worthless daughter, and I aim to get what's mine. Rebecca stepped forward, anger propelling her. I was never yours to buy, Wallace. My father had no right to sell me, and you had no right to purchase me like cattle. She looked at her father. I'm sorry, father, but I won't sacrifice my life to pay for your mistakes. Her father finally met her gaze, something like admiration flickering briefly in his rheumy eyes. No, he said quietly. No, you shouldn't. He turned to Wallace. The deal is off, Thornton. I'll find another way to settle my debts. Wallace's face contorted with rage. You spineless, he reached for his gun, but Xavier was faster. A shot rang out, and Wallace howled as the revolver flew from his hand. A spray of blood indicating Xavier's bullet had grazed his fingers. Next one won't miss, Xavier said calmly. Now take your men and get off my land. For a moment, it seemed Wallace might press the issue despite his injury. Then he clutched his bleeding hand to his chest, eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over, he spat. Yes, it is, Rebecca's father said with unexpected firmness. You'll get your money, Wallace, but not my daughter. Never my daughter. Wallace glared at each of them in turn before wheeling his horse around. Come on, boys. These fools aren't worth the bullets. With a final venomous look, he spurred his horse and rode off, his men following. Only Rebecca's father remained, looking suddenly old and frail atop his horse. "Rebecca," he began. "I'm sorry. What I did, there's no excuse." Rebecca felt Xavier's hand find hers, warm and supportive. "No, there isn't," she agreed. "But I understand desperation, Father. I hope you find a better way through yours." Her father nodded sadly. "You seem happy here." "I am," she said simply. "Happier than I've been in a very long time." "Then I wish you well." He tipped his hat to Xavier. "Take care of her, young man. She deserves that much." "Yes, sir," Xavier replied. "She deserves that and more." As her father rode away, Rebecca felt a curious mixture of sadness and liberation. The past was riding away with him, leaving her free to embrace the future standing beside her. That night, as they sat before the fire, Xavier took her hand. "I meant what I said to your father. You deserve happiness, Rebecca. All I can offer is this ranch, hard work, and my heart." "If that's enough," Rebecca silenced him with a kiss. "It's everything," she whispered against his lips. "Everything I never knew I wanted until I got lost in the fog and heard your whistle." 2 days later, Clara Foster returned home to find her brother inexplicably happy and a strange woman wearing her clothes. After initial surprise and a barrage of questions, Clara embraced Rebecca like the sister she'd always wanted. "Keep him in line," Clara whispered conspiratorially. "He's stubborn as a mule, but he's got the best heart in Colorado territory." Over the next months, Rebecca learned the rhythms of ranch life, the exhaustion of spring calving, the satisfaction of a bountiful garden harvest, the quiet joy of evenings spent reading aloud by lamplight as Xavier whittled or mended tack. She wrote to her father occasionally, brief letters that gradually evolved from stilted politeness to genuine, if cautious, affection. Wallace Thornton made one more attempt to cause trouble, filing a complaint with the territorial magistrate claiming Xavier had stolen his property, meaning Rebecca. The judge, a weathered old frontiersman with little patience for men like Wallace, dismissed the case with a scathing lecture on the rights of women to choose their own husbands. A year to the day after she'd fled her wedding, Xavier took Rebecca to the meadow where she'd first learned to gallop freely across the open range. A blanket was spread beneath a cottonwood tree, a picnic laid out. "I've been thinking," Xavier said as they watched clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. "This ranch feels different with you here. Better. Fuller somehow." Rebecca smiled, running her fingers through the lush grass. "It feels like home." "It is home," Xavier said. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, carved with intricate wildflowers. "I've been working on this for months," he admitted as he handed it to her. Inside lay a ring, a simple band of gold with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," Xavier explained. "She always said the pearl reminded her that beauty can grow from adversity." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as Xavier took her hand. "I'm not one for fancy speeches," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I know that when I heard you calling in the fog that day, something in me recognized you before I ever saw your face. I love you, Rebecca Anderson. Will you marry me?" Rebecca's answer was in her kiss, in the tears that mingled with his as they held each other beneath the cottonwood tree. This time there would be no running from the altar. This time she would walk toward it willingly, toward the man whose whistle had guided her home. Their wedding took place that autumn, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the mountainsides. Clara served as Rebecca's maid of honor, and to everyone's surprise, Rebecca's father attended, sober and humble, ready at last to truly see his daughter as her own person. As Rebecca and Xavier exchanged vows before a small gathering of friends and neighbors, fog began rolling down from the mountains, not thick and disorienting like the day they'd met, but gentle and ethereal, catching the late afternoon sunlight and transforming the ranch into a golden dreamscape. "Two short, one long," Xavier whispered as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "If you ever get lost again, that's how you'll find me." "I'm not lost anymore," Rebecca replied, her heart so full it might burst. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Years later, when their children asked how they met, Xavier would whistle the pattern "Too short, one long," and Rebecca would smile, remembering the fog and fear, the running and finding, and how sometimes the wrong path can lead to exactly the right destination.